So I was roaming around my comments section a few days back, and someone told me that I had to test the Universal X86 Tuning Utility. And man, this thing does almost everything. I wouldn't even be surprised if in 1 or 2 years it was taking coffees and making sandwiches, because this is how much it can do. And I mean, this software can actually overclock most of your CPUs, can do power limiting on your CPUs, can even overclock your integrated graphics if you have, let's say, a laptop. In case of Intel CPUs, you can actually use a power limiter as well. I mean, it can do almost everything. But well, nothing better than to see how it works. We have the Universal X86 Tuning Utility. By the way, the software is free. You don't have to pay anything to be able to download it. You can indeed support the developers with a buy as a beer option, or join the Discord as well. So if you want to help the developers with this project, just do it.
Don't let your dreams be dreams.
We're running the version 2.3.0 beta 5 that you can get by going into the settings and selecting, for example, check for updates. For example, at this moment we actually have a new update, which is nice. We have several options like the pre-made presets, custom presets, adaptive mode, automations, game library, system info, need help, maybe, and support us. As you need help, I also need help, so Leonine, today's sponsor. Today's video sponsor is GVG Mall, bringing you lots of software deals like Windows 10, Windows 11, Office 2019 or 2021 with a new Windows 11 design. And for all of these, you can use my SKG discount code for 30% off, getting a Windows 11 serial key for $22 and a Windows 10 one for only $15. Then use the key on your Windows settings and you'll have an activated system. And by the way, the options will be slightly different depending on the system that you have. If you have an Intel CPU system, the options will be slightly different. If you have an Nvidia card, you'll also have more options on one side, but less options on the other compared to the Radeon card, if you have one of those. But we'll get into that, because I actually have a recording here of the Intel system, and even my mini computer that I have there. And yeah, my cat is meowing, as usual. And here is Flock. This cat is just like, look at him. Look. Now back to the presets, that's basically it. The Echo will have a lower power limit compared to the Balanced, that it will have a lower power limit compared to the Performance, that it will have a lower power limit compared to the Extreme. Lower power limits, lower temperature floors, and so on, temperature roofs, sorry, and so on, so on, so on. Now as we go to the custom presets, we have basically all the options that we can overclock with, or that we can mess with manually. Instead of doing the pre-made settings, we have them custom presets with all the manual settings we can use. And we have, for example, a CPU tuning, which allows us to change the CPU temperature limit. The temperature limit, you can select it, for example, up to 85, 95, I don't really know, maybe 95, yes. Then we have the CPU power tuning, which allows you to change the PPT limit, the EDC limit in amperes, I believe that's how it's pronounced in English, and the TDC limit as well. And if you actually hover your mouse over the PPT limit, it says controls the CPU package power tracking power limit, which is actually the most important, because this one is the one that will limit or not your CPU in terms of power draw. For example, the package power, let's say for the 7940 AGS in terms of mini computer and integrated graphics, was like 65 watts, but I was able, for example, to make it go up to, let's say, 95 or something like that. But yeah, with the software, with the X86 Universal Tuning Utility, I can actually do it. My love, Flock. Whoop. And on top of this, we also have the UXTU Super Resolution. Yes, we have upscaling in this software as well, powered by a customized version of Magpie, which is a free-to-use or open source software in terms of upscaling. And we have the option to enable VSync, auto recapture, we have the option to change the sharpness as well, and the resolution scale can be application controlled, ultra quality, quality, balance, performance, and ultra performance. This basically uses the FSR 1.0 algorithm in terms of upscaling, basically spatial upscaling, which is not that great, but you can use it in all games. It's an option. I would use just FSR or even the FSR mods, which are usually much better, but if you can't use those, this one will be more than enough. If you have a Radeon card, you have the Radeon graphics options, where you have the Radeon Anti-Lag, the option to enable it here inside the software. Radeon Super Resolution, which is basically the same that we have here with a UXTU Super Resolution, Radeon Boost, and Radeon Image Sharpening. I mean, we even have the Enhanced Sync, which is actually great. So if you are one of those guys that just installs the driver only, instead of installing, for example, the minimal installation or the Radeon software at all, the Adrenaline software at all, you can just install the driver and then use this tuning utility to actually handle all those features like the anti-lag and so on. We have the AMD Precision Boost Overdrive, which is basically the PBO. Then you have the best one, which is the Curve Optimizer, the one that you have in BIOS or when using Ryzen Master. Well, you have it here as well. Provides the ability to customize curve optimizer options, and you can select all core and you can select iGPU. In this case, it allows me to select the integrated graphics because I have a 7700X, and the 7700X does feature like 2 compute units of RDNA 2, so that's why the iGPU offset shows here. But this is actually great because you can just go here, for example, and kind of undervolt. It is not undervolting, but when you do, for example, -20 on the CPU side, it means that the CPU will use less voltage for the same frequency or the same voltage with higher frequency, which is not properly undervolting, but it is something close to it, which is actually nice. Some CPUs might actually allow you just to use -12 or they'll crash, others -10, others -30, it depends on the CPU binning and your luck of the draw, of course. But usually, for example, on my 7940 HS, I was able to use -30 on both of them, and they just worked perfectly. I was having the same power consumption as I did before at stock settings, and at the same time I was having higher boost frequencies in both the iGPU and of course the CPU as well. So it was a win-win situation. Same power draw, same temperatures, sometimes even less, and even higher frequencies and higher frames per second, which is great. And then we have the per core curve optimizer, which basically allows you to select the curve optimizer for each core if you just want to fiddle with the settings one by one, which is also nice. Now we have the adaptive mode, which is also interesting, and you have the auto switch, and you can select, it's basically a per game profile that you can do. It will allow different settings or use different settings for different games. I can just go here and select different settings for different games, and then you can select the basic adaptive mode. Once again, maximum temperature limit, maximum power limit as well, which is nice, and the maximum curve optimizer limit. Then you have the Turbo Boost Overdrive iGPU settings, and you have the maximum iGPU clock limit, the minimum iGPU clock limit, and the minimum CPU clock limit. Now, I would also, instead of having, let's say, the power limit, I would also like to have, let's say, the maximum clocks limit on the CPU as well, but I guess we can't have it all. And you can select super resolution for a game and Radeon settings for a specific game as well, which is, well, inside what we knew. Then we have the games library, which basically just shows you the game that you're playing with some data. And then you have the automatations with preset on battery charge, preset on battery discharge, and preset on system resume. And you have the echo preset, balance preset, performance preset, and extreme preset. And my cat just won't stop meowing, and he isn't hungry, so I don't really know what he wants, but I will surely find out. And then you have the info of your computer, nothing really new that you have in Windows, in some other applications. And then you have the settings, which allow you to start on system boot, start minimize, reapply on start, auto reapply, and so on, so on, so on, so on. And then the check for updates, download, update, and so on, so on, so on. Now, remember what I told you about the mini computer? I actually have a video with the mini computer settings. Now, as soon as you go to the pre-made presets on that same APU, things change. As you can see, we have the extreme preset that I select, and then the command output actually shows, for example, TCL temp equals to 95, meaning that it allows the temperature to go as high as 95, the CHT temp up to 95 as well, APU skin temp up to 95, and these are temperatures and options that you can select with a custom mode. But by doing the extreme mode, well, it actually selects certain temperatures. And selecting the extreme mode doesn't actually mean that you'll have the best performance with your APU, with your mini computer, or let's say even your mobile computer, but it does mean that you'll get better performance at the expense of higher temperatures and higher power draw. Inside the custom options, we actually have more things. with the APU temperature tuning, APU power tuning, APU VRM, we also have the VRM now, the APU iGPU tuning, and then we have the super resolution, the Radeon graphics once again, the precision boost overdrive, the curve optimizer, and the curve optimizer per core. These ones are basically the same, but in here we actually have more settings with the tuning in terms of thermal targets, sorry. We can select the thermal targets instead of just limiting the power limit. Then we have the power tuning just for that, for the power limiting, and then we can even change the VRMs. In the iGPU clock, we have the iGPU clock with basically the megahertz that you want to use. I was able to even reach 3000 megahertz, but it just wasn't worth it at all. Then we have another new thing, which is the AMD boost profile, something that just appears, at least on my mini computer, with the auto power saving and performance. Now, this is a small video that I recorded testing the APU, the mini computer that I have with the Ryzen 9 7940HS, as you can see. And I tested the stock settings, which are basically stock 65 watts, versus the extreme preset, which actually made the CPU power draw or the package power draw go up to 70 watts, 5 watts from 4 to 5 watts above the what we previously had. And then the manual overclocking that I did that allowed it to go up to 85 watts. In terms of temperatures and so on, we have the stock at 74 degrees. The extreme preset is actually lower somehow at 72 degrees, and we have the maximum overclock, in this case 76 watts and still at 73 or 72 degrees with a GPU at 2900 MHz. As you can see, the extreme preset puts it at around 2800, while the stock settings are putting it around 2600, 2500. So things change a bit. And even in terms of FPS, well, although the difference is not much, we do have a bit more FPS, and at the same time, it is usually a win-win situation. Now, for example, as you look at the temperatures are much higher with a manual overclocking because we are now hovering 80 watts. And 80 watts is actually a lot for a mini computer. The heat output is a lot, and the little fan that we have there on the Minis forum, UM790 Pro, that you can see in this video passing right now on screen, is not enough to cool the CPU at 80 watts power draw, while we have 74 watts with 66 watts of power draw at stock and 75 degrees with 70 watts. So basically the same temperature with the extreme preset, but we do have a bit more FPS, nothing really relevant. And if we look, for example, at the extreme preset once again, we have roughly the same power draw here and there, but we do have the same temperatures and the overall performance is a bit better. So overall it is a win-win situation, although the extreme preset does tend to, from time to time, maybe due to power limitations, I don't really know, but it tends to actually drop the CPU frequency a lot in favor of the GPU frequency. While with the manual overclocking we're hovering both 80 degrees and 80 watts of power draw, but we do have the CPU frequency at 5 GHz compared to the 4800 MHz here, and the GPU of course at 2900 MHz versus 2800 MHz or 2500, 2600 MHz at stock. But there's more. We're now using stock settings, the 65 watts max, versus a manual power saving mode that I did setting by setting, using the curve optimizer at -25 for both the CPU and iGPU. Now this is really interesting because if you look at the power draw, we have roughly the same power draw as we did with the stock settings. So 65 watts here with the stock settings versus 65 watts with my power draw profile, with my power saving profile, I mean. And if you look at the GPU settings, well, the GPU clocks are in between lower and higher compared to the standard and stock 2600 MHz here, but at the same time look at the CPU frequencies, which are considerably higher, still inside the same power limit. So still inside the 65 watts power limit, we do have the CPU frequency being always over 5 GHz, where with the stock settings it is from 4.7 to 4.8. It actually depends on the scenario, and we do have more FPS. So 139 versus 143, more FPS on the average, more FPS in the 1% lows, same temperatures or even lower temperatures in this scenario, and once again, yeah, the power draw is basically the same, so it's almost a win-win situation. With Fortnite things are different though, and as you can see we have the stock once again versus the extreme preset, which somehow actually brings lower performance than the stock settings. I don't really know why. Well, I actually know why, because the CPU frequencies are quite lower, but I don't really know why it did this of the lower CPU the lower CPU frequencies, as even the power draw, as you can see, is 54-55 watts. So it isn't thermally limited, it isn't power limited as well, so it makes no sense. As while with the manual OC this time we actually have up to 95 watts of power draw, which is insane compared to the 65 watts. With the 65 watts of stock, we have a major increase in power draw, and we have also a major increase in terms of temperatures. But of course, if you look at the FPS, it's 92 versus 95, so it is obviously not worth it for a single second. Just 3 FPS and you'll have like 90 degrees, and then you'll have 90 watts of power usage. Completely not worth it. But then again, we have my manual power saving profile, once again with -25 with a curve optimizer on both CPU and iGPU. And in here the results aren't, well, as great, because in terms of FPS it is more or less the same. In this case 90, in this case 92, 90. It's a bit more FPS in the average, but a bit less in the 1% low somehow. If we look at the CPU frequencies, yeah, there's a lot of difference. For example, from 4.5 to 4.8 maximum, and in here we are like 4.8, 4.9, always above 4.8, as you can see, and in here we can go as low as 4.5 because it is stock. Considerably higher frequency in terms of the CPU, considerably higher frequency in terms of the GPU as well, and in terms of power draw and temperatures, it is basically the same. And to finalize, we have the custom presets, but now for the 12600K, and I told you that this application was actually able to overclock and to have more settings on the Nvidia side compared to the AMD one. For example, here we don't have the Radeon settings, because once again we don't have a Radeon GPU in this build, but we do have an Intel CPU and an Nvidia GPU. Now, as soon as you have an Nvidia GPU, it won't allow you to use anti-lag, because anti-lag is an AMD feature. It doesn't allow you to use reflex as well, but it does allow you to overclock the GPU the same way you do with MS Afterburner, which is actually a nice thing. So it allows you to select the frequency adjusted voltage limit, but you can just ignore this one and select the GPU core clock offset and the GPU memory clock offset, and you will overclock your GPU the same way you do with MS Afterburner. And since we have an Intel CPU, we just have the power tuning option now, which is actually pretty nice, because if you have a CPU that is consuming a lot of power in a certain game, just by using the power tuning option and limiting the wattage on your CPU, you'll be able to maybe like lose 5% performance, but reduce the power usage by a lot. And I'll show you that in a minute. Let me just see if we have more options. Yes, we have a bit more options. In the adaptive mode, we can now select the maximum temperature instead just of the maximum power limit, which is nice. And in terms of the GPU overclock, it is basically the same, yes. And that case scenario that I was talking about is exactly this one. For example, running Starfield at 1080p, if you can see, we're running with a 12600K and the 4070 Ti Super, and we're running at 85%. Now, as you can see, we're getting 80 watts, but we can go to the power limit, just select the checkbox, and we will go to 65. Now, we had 79 FPS in this exact scene, sorry, and we went from 79 to like 80, 79, so basically the same, and we went from 80 watts to 65 watts, meaning that we can indeed reduce the wattage from 80 to 65, reducing of course the wattage, the power draw, and the temperatures as well, or at least the noise levels, and at the same time the performance will be more or less the same. And if you have a really poor CPU cooling solution, or if your ambient temperatures are really high, you can go even further, just limit the power even further, and of course it will reduce the performance now to 75. So we have let's say a 5 FPS difference depending on the case, but at the same time, once again, your temperatures are even lower, your noise levels will be even lower as well, and your power consumption will be reduced to 55 watts. As you can see, the temperatures already decreased, and of course the frequency decreases as well, because if you're limiting the power, the frequency will adjust itself depending on the power limit is selected. The lower the power limit, of course, the lower the frequency will have to be to stay inside that power limit. It's a win-win situation in my book, but especially if you have a laptop, mini computer or a handheld system, this is a must. You can overclock, you can undervolt, you can do power limits, you can exceed the power limits that you have preset on your mobile systems or on your APUs. I mean, it's just great. And well guys, that's all for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe and share it. By the way, leave a comment in the comment section and let me know what you think about the software. I actually believe it is interesting. It is interesting because, as you saw, with my mini computer, I was actually able to get a bit better performance with higher CPU frequencies, meaning that the 1% lows and the gameplay smoothness would be better as well, with higher GPU frequencies that in most cases like Counter-Strike 2 would give me better averages, better 1% lows, better temperatures and so on. It depends, you can tweak it the way you want to, and I mean, it wouldn't allow you any other way, because my mini computer, for example, does not allow me to change those settings on BIOS, but with this software I can actually change them and overwrite the BIOS settings in order to have a better performance overall, or to have better temperatures, or to have, once again, just lower power consumption. It's a win-win situation. Thank you very much, comment in the comment section, and hope you enjoyed the video. See you soon, guys.